Hello and welcome to this week's IG Live. Today we are going to be talking to author Janelle Harper. I have her book right behind me. My block looks like it's a love letter to the Bronx, and we're going to talk to her about why it is such a special place and how she honored it in her book. She is a debut author. Hello. And for those of you who want to support Read Your World and want to see more interviews like this where we get to support and promote diverse authors and illustrators, then consider donating to our auction. We have an auction coming up next month. Hello. And we are looking for more items that we can auction off. So the more money we're able to raise through the auction, the more we're able to have interviews like this. So please consider what you might be able to donate. You can go to the link in our bio to find out about that. Like Janelle Harper. And she's getting on here right now. We can find out more about the inspiration behind her book and how she incorporated so much of the local culture into the book. Hello. So nice to talk with you.
So good to be here. Thank you.
Well, why don't we get started and you can tell us what was your journey to becoming an author? Is this something that you always wanted to do?
So when I was younger, I never thought about being an author. That just wasn't something that was discussed as an option. You know, you had your traditional careers and you go to college, find a good career, you retire, enjoy life. And so, but I've always been a storyteller. I've been a dancer since I was 4. So it was always in me. And, English was always one of my favorite subjects. And so I love to write and write poetry, especially. And so it kind of, I guess, was like a natural progression that I didn't know was happening. But I always had a connection to children. I was a teacher for 17 years. And so it all kind of came full circle.
That's amazing. And to tell us the story about your book, it's a love letter to the Bronx, and it really pays tribute to the unique culture, the history of the Bronx. Why is it such a special place? I mean, I know you even have it as your handle, the Bronx Storyteller. And why do you love it so much? And how did you celebrate it through your book?
Yeah, so I am a Bronx native, raised in the Bronx. I still reside in the Bronx. I taught in the Bronx, and so I just know it's a special place, full of so many dynamic people, places, and things. And for those of us who live here and grew up here, we know those things. But unfortunately, those who haven't had a chance to visit don't. And so this was just a love letter to all the children I see in my classroom, in my neighborhood, just so they know how special their community is. We are the birthplace of hip hop, a whole culture and music genre that just celebrated 50 years last August. And so, yeah, there's so many beautiful things. And so I just wanted to highlight it. Oh, I see you holding up a couple of the spreads.
Yeah. I know you said that so you talked about it being the birthplace of hip hop. And so that really influenced you to decide to write the novel, or not the novel, the book in verse. Can you tell us more about that? And what was your writing process like? Was it hard to shift into thinking to it verse, or did that come really naturally to you?
Yeah. So, you know, hip hop, growing up as a child in the Bronx, like hip hop, I felt like was our first language. And it's just so poetic. And the city also, New York City, has like its natural rhythm and cadence of its own. And so when I thought about this story, like to me, it just felt authentic to tell it in verse. And I actually struggled because when I had the story idea, I hadn't came across a picture book yet that had verse. Like I read plenty of, you know, middle grade and YA and novels in verse. And so I was like, oh, I don't think we can do this, you know, for this age range. And so it was really like a battle, like, well, how do I tell this in prose? Because it just didn't feel natural and authentic. And it wasn't until I came across Kwame Alexander's Undefeated, illustrated by Kadir Nelson, that's written in verse and beautifully done. I was like, oh, I can do this. And then from there, the story just naturally flowed because that was what it was meant to be.
Right. And I know I just put that back there so people can see it. I love that was something, because you're doing something that's really different that you haven't seen, but it was exactly what it needed to be for this book. And I know you also said that part of your goal is to create stories that really reflect the faces that you see in your neighborhood, that you see in your classroom. So why is that so important?
It's important, especially I just found that sometimes people who are not a part of the community, like they have misconceptions. And so writing the story was celebrating community, but also taking back our narrative.
Mm.
We know who we are, we know what's special about our community, and sharing it with others, but also just reminding ourselves about what makes us unique and what makes us special. So it was really about just reclaiming our narrative.
And you even touch on that in the book. I think there's one line that says something like more than headlines,
Mm-hmm.
and also I heard you say in an interview that a lot of times, even today, kids growing up in the Bronx, they may not know that it was the birthplace of hip hop. They may not know kind of that history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So they enjoy this culture. They love the music. They love the dance. And then I'm like, does anyone know where it started? And they're just yelling out all kinds of places. And I'm like, no, right here. And they're like, really? And I'm like, yeah. And they can't even like phantom that like this thing that they love that's now like global and international, like started right here in the Bronx. And so I just really love this story just to highlight all the amazing things like the subway performers, the Icy Man, the bodega,
Mhm.
just paying homage to what a great place it
Yeah,
is.
and like you said, even for the kids themselves that are from there, for them to appreciate what a special place it is. I mean, I think one thing that comes across in your book is just the joy, and especially Black joy, which we need to see more of in picture books. What do you hope that readers take away from your book?
Um, I I hope they find joy. I hope they have a chance to see their self.
Mm-hmm.
Like so many times I've like done story times or author events and the kids are like, "Oh, that looks like me," or "Mommy, that looks like you." And I'm like, "Oh, my heart just, melts that they see their self in the pages." And even adults, like they are totally into story time and they're reading and they're like, you can tell like they feel seen, they feel heard. And so I just want that experience for every child, whether it's in my book or other books. I want them to feel seen, feel loved, feel heard, feel valued.
That must be such an amazing feeling to get that kind of reaction
Yeah.
from them. And part of it, I mean, of course, it's your amazing the verse that you have in the book, and also we have to talk about the illustrations, which were done by, again, the legendary Frank Morrison,
Mm-hmm.
two-time Coretta Scott King Award winner.
Mm-hmm.
And the illustrations are just amazing, and they go so well with your writing. I'll just pull up some of this. So for you, I mean, this is your debut picture book. What did that feel like to find out that he was going to be doing the illustrations? What does that mean for you?
I am still in awe, and Frank and I were finally able to meet with each other in person in February at the African American Children's Book Fair. So that was, we just like immediately embraced. But for people who don't like know the process, especially with traditional publishing, like I was lucky to have, some voice and say in the process of selecting the illustrator. Not everyone is so fortunate. But I was, and you go through a list and you say, who you hope for, who I was praying for, and just thinking about the story and the essence and the heart of it. And Frank, like, ultimately came to mind. But anyone who knows Frank, like, he has illustrated like over 50 children's books. He is like booked and busy. And so I was just like, I know it's a long shot, but my barrel deserves it. So I'm going to shoot my shot. And like, luckily, like, he read the story, he loved it. He's never, illustrated a picture book about the Bronx. So that drew him to it. And he's a graffiti artist. So throughout the book, there's a lot of graffiti, and he was able to pay homage to various break dancers and graffiti artists throughout. And so that was really drew him to it. And I was just so happy because he said he called himself retiring from illustrating from picture books. And so he said he came out of retirement for me. So I'm happy.
That is so special. And that's a real testament to your story and to the subject. And I just want to say, I know we had a comment that we're sideways. I know that's a little
Oh,
strange. We're doing that on purpose. I know it looks a little weird on Instagram, but it'll look really nice on YouTube later. But that I mean, that really does bring the story to life so much. And I know you can't talk too much about like what else you're working on, but I understand you do have other projects. Are you going to stay along kind of the same kind of genre? Are you going to stick with picture books, or what can you tell us?
so there are definitely going to be other projects that are unannounced. So of course I can't, talk about that
Right.
too much, but picture books are my heart. So I'm always going to write picture books. So I will definitely have some upcoming picture books in the future, but just I am venturing out, trying other genres. So I am like dipping my toes, trying middle grade right now. And so I always say that so I can hold myself accountable and get it done.
Yeah, now it's out there in public. It's on the record.
Yeah.
And how has that been for you? Is it a big switch to try and do, like, is it challenging to try and do that, or is it nice to kind of have the space to kind of fill out the story more? What's that been?
So I am dipping my toes in middle grade novel and verse.
Oh, nice.
And I am very much kind of like a pantser, which could be problematic when you're doing longer form. And my writing process, I am somebody, because I'm like very lyrical. If something doesn't like sound right, like I have to stop and go back and revise it before I go on, which is okay when you're doing picture book because it's shorter form, and so you can kind of revise and edit as you go. But when you're writing a longer format, it's like it's a little challenging. So I'm still trying to figure out what my writing process is for writing middle grade, but
Interesting. Yeah, what about as far as having like it has so many more words? Do you find yourself kind of needing to flesh it out more, or is it nice to have a little more space?
it's nice to have a little more space, but since it's like novel and verse, you still like it's more poetic, so it doesn't feel as burdensome or heavy as trying to write in prose. I think if I was trying to do that, I'd be like,
Yeah.
but because like I'm naturally like lyrical and poetic, like novel and verse, yeah, it feels good to write.
So when you were teaching, what age group were you writing for? And I imagine, what was that like do you wish that you had had books like this in the classroom? Did you struggle to find books that you felt like were reflecting the kids in your classroom?
Yeah, so so I'm certified to teach K through 12. So at some point I've taught like all the grades. And I recently stepped down from teaching in September just because trying to balance debut year and teaching just wasn't going to work. So the last grade level I was teaching was 6 through 8. And I was actually a dance teacher. So I had my big studio and my sound system and my mirrors and my ballet bars, and we just having a good time. So I was a dance teacher, but even, a lot of times I collaborated with, my colleagues who taught ELA and social studies. And I think we were just very intentional, making sure like the books we had in the school library and in, the classrooms reflected the kids, we saw, especially in middle school, like it was like, if they don't see themselves in this book, they're like, well, what are we doing here?
Right.
And so we were definitely intentional, and it just made me happy. So like the Jason Reynolds, the Kwame Alexanders, the Nick Stones, like those were present in the school library, which made me smile and made me happy because I just don't remember that when I was that age.
Right, definitely. Do you feel like, did you have kind of an aha moment when maybe you were a kid growing up and you were like, wait a minute, why am I not seeing books that are reflecting, or was that something you thought much about growing up?
I feel like I didn't as a kid because it was just like you knew there weren't many people that looked like you in the magazine or in the app. You just kind of were like, okay. And so I talked about this like in another interview. So when I read books, you just superimpose yourself. You just imagine you are the main character because there aren't any main characters that look like you. So, it was a lot of like imagination in that sense.
Right, or even, I mean, so one about having diverse characters, but also being in this particular setting. I feel like a lot of books, like there aren't that many that are in like any kind of urban setting, much less the Bronx. You know, that to find that like even in TV shows. I remember when Sesame Street came out, it was so revolutionary because it was like, wow, they're living
Yeah.
in a city. Like it kind of made you think about how skewed it had been before, that it seems so different to see that.
Yeah, and even like picture books, like there's like you can find a lot about like the city, and when they say the
Right.
city they mean Manhattan.
Right.
But like it's very rare you're going to find, you know, book about like the other
Right.
boroughs, like the Bronx. And so it's nice that, you know, people like myself and other like Bronx natives like Alyssa Reynoso Morris and CG
Yes.
Esperanza,
Mhm.
like we're all like it feels so good to be around them and coming up kind of at the same time, and
Right.
we're, you know, adding the representation of our neighborhoods to picture books.
Yeah, when it is really special and such a great story. I think good for all kids to be reading. So thank you for taking the time to talk with us today. And I should mention Alyssa Reynoso Morris. She was on our program. Gosh, I don't remember when that was. Probably a few months ago, but I bet we were really lucky to have her and lucky to get to talk with you today. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and so for anybody who joined us late, this is going to be up in a few minutes on our Instagram and later on our YouTube channel. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.